So this is June 25, variant 21. This is the latest question that we have. I still have to check if this question came in November or not. It's your variant. May it didn't come in our variant. All right. So the question says, explain how the circular flow of income in an economy changes when the economy moves from a closed economy to an open economy. A few things we have to explain how it is happening. Do we need a diagram? We don't need a diagram in this one. They haven't asked for it. What if you do make the diagram? Well, as long as it is supporting, you've done some sort of write-up, which sort of like, makes sense of the whole thing. तो फिर ठीक है. But the writing part needs to be there. I'll do both, uh, just for the sake that we learn the theory also. And then the second part of the question is, and consider what determines the extent of this change. Meaning जब आप close से open जा रहे हैं तो how open are you going and what determines that? Um, if we talk about circular flow of income, um, obviously we have to start with the most basic, which is a two-sector economy. Okay. And in a two-sector economy, we basically have two um, sectors, which is households and firms. Because they're saying how the circular flow of income in an economy is, so I think in this one, what I'll do is I'll do the whole thing, meaning that how goods flow from firms to the households, right? So this is how the goods and services flow. And in return, this is how consumer spending, yeah, expenditure on those goods and services is shown. So this is one. Okay. Then we know that factors of production moves from household to the firms, and you can mention if you want that land, labor, capital, and enterprise moves in this direction. But the key one thing that we must mention also is that how then firms make those factor payments, which we know are the incomes of those factors of production, and they are rent, wages, capital ka interest, and you have profits. These are the four rewards. ये आपका circular flow of income है. But then I also have trouble over here. ये तो एक circular flow है two sector का. When they've mentioned closed, so that means we have to talk about the withdrawals and the injections. Okay. So we know that there are some set of withdrawals or the leakages from the system, and they are, say, two sector के अंदर savings is a withdrawal and injections ke under we have, there's no another name for injections, but in a two sector you have investment as an injection. And जब आप closed economy की बात करते हैं तो that means we have a government also, and government taking taxes, money goes out, and then the government does spending. GS means not goods and services in this case, but we're talking about government spending. Lastly, when we go into an open economy, which our discussion is going to be about, the later part, analysis के अंदर that imports takes the money out of the system and exports brings that money back into the system. So this is how basically our circular flow of income kind of looks like. Um, but is there mark for it? There's no mark for it. They haven't asked for the dime. तो अब इसी को यूज करते हुए if you end up explaining the whole thing, the circular flow of income, so few fundamental things that we have to talk about is कि सबसे पहले circular flow of income होता क्या है? ठीक है, so we define that circular flow of income. Let me just use this abbreviation. Please don't use this abbreviation. ये मैंने अभी बनाई है. This is not like commonly used, so please do write the whole thing. That circular flow of income shows how incomes, spending, and factors of production flows around the economy. Acha, last time I simply said circular flow income shows how the money moves around the economy, but that's not it, right? It is talking about how the income is moving from firms to household. It is showing how household say expenditure is shown. It also shows how factors of production are moving. In fact, even how goods are moving. So it is much more extensive, even though it's just called circular flow of income. But there's a lot more things that are basically going in it. ठीक है? It shows that firms produces goods and services and sells it to the households, and in return the household makes spending on those goods and services, right? And that's what we're seeing. सबसे पहला वाला part, the goods are flowing from here and households are making payments or spending on it. Okay. उसके अलावा households gives factors of production such as land, labor, capital. Please try not to hold back information because, like I mentioned last time, also that there is no negative marking for information, but missing information, definitely you don't get the mark. So, household gives factors of production such as land, labor, capital, and enterprise to the firms, while firms makes payments for these factors of production, such as, and then you can write the whole rent and wages and interest and uh, profits, right? So ये आपकी सारी बातें हो जाती हैं. This explains the circular flow of income which I have made, the four arrows above. ठीक है, फिर उसके बाद um, we must also mention all the injections and the withdrawals. Uh, तो हम ये बात कर सकते हैं कि सबसे पहले we would like to explain what do we mean by this term, that there are withdrawals, there are leakages in the economy. तो withdrawal और leakages के अंदर the first thing you should do is you should always explain what you mean by withdrawal. So withdrawal is the outflow of incomes from the circular flow of income, or फिर definitely you should explain, not explain, but suggest what leakages we have, such as you have savings and taxes and imports. ठीक है? I'm mentioning all of them. Later part of the question के अंदर I will explain कि किस तरीके से इन अ क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी कौन कौन से विड्रॉल्स और इंजेक्शंस होते हैं, एंड इंजेक्शंस के अंदर व्हाट इज इंजेक्शन एंड कौन कौन से इंजेक्शंस होते हैं. सो इंजेक्शन इज बेसिकली इनफ्लो ऑफ इनकम्स इनटू द circular flow of income, and uske andar we have basically investment from the firms. We have government spending, we have exports. ठीक है? Maximum information, so that at least knowledge and understanding ki we maximize on the information. Now, because the question is about when you're moving from a closed to an open economy, so this is where I will clearly state that closed economy ke andar you only have firms, households. So you have firms, you have households, and government. और इस सिचुएशन के अंदर the withdrawals that we have is only savings and taxes, and injections we have is only investment and government spending. Okay? But when an economy becomes an open economy, then you have firms, you have households, you have government, and you have international trade. All right? And then you have international trade. तो इसमें अब withdrawals के अंदर you have saving, taxes and imports, and injections के अंदर you have investments, government spending and exports. तो ये आपकी एक पूरी explanation हो जाती है. I think pretty much cover every single thing, and it explains that how going from a closed to an open economy, uh, exports and imports and international trade is the main element which gets added. अगर आप एक sentence में ये एक summary लिख सकें, तो I think it's a wise idea to do that. फिर उसके बाद, let me go back to the question and see what was the requirement. So basically, obviously, the diagram is not, there's no grades for it. And consider what determines the extent of this change. Um, I guess when we're talking about the extent of this change, so the question is about closed से open economy के अंदर जब हम जाते हैं, in the economy changes when the economy moves from a closed to the open economy. I think over here, the discussion that is required for an evaluation purpose, that to what extent this is happening, I think it's more about that, um, let me say, the size of openness. Okay. What do we mean by the size of openness? What we mean is that, you have countries like North Korea, you have countries like Pakistan, you have countries like Afghanistan, we have countries like Iran, and then you have United States and the Western countries. Now, when we talk about international trade, it's about कि आपकी जो पूरी You know how we have aggregate expenditure is equals to C plus I, ये two sector हो गया, three sector and four sector, right? So in this entire aggregate demand or aggregate expenditure, which is basically our GDP, the more open the economy is, the greater this number becomes, right? X minus M का number becomes bigger. So Iran, highly sanctioned economy, their X minus M ka number would be a lot smaller compared to the whole thing. So percentage of the GDP, this would be very small. For United States and other countries which are much more open to trade, their number of X minus M will be much greater. So size of openness, so this affects the contribution of international trade in the GDP. So more open economy will have a large X minus M ka number, whereas a less open economy like Iran is going to have a small X minus M ka number, right? So this is where the evaluation, I think, should head. Market schema, obviously, they don't give much information on the openness and the whole thing. So it is left up to you कि आप और कैसे इस information को further discuss कर सकते हैं. ठीक है. Um, इसके अंदर क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी के अंदर हमें पता है दैट गवर्नमेंट इज ऑब्वियसली देयर, तो सीआईजी का कंट्रीब्यूशन होता है और फिर एक्स माइनस एम का कंट्रीब्यूशन हैज टू डू विद. We can't go into the whole discussion of balance of payment and all of that because that's all redundant in this case. Uh, we can definitely talk about um, trade restrictions and sanctions, barriers to trade, right? X minus M को import duties or export duties और इस तरह की चीजें affect कर लेती हैं. But we have to make sure when we're writing, the question should not become about trade barriers, but rather the question should still remain कि एक closed economy से जब हम open economy में जाते हैं, so how big of an impact it can have on the economy, right? So obviously, closed economy ke numbers would be restricted to this, but as you become an open economy, your economy grows inside as a result of this additional element coming into the whole economic system, right? So realistically, majority of the countries do have an open economy. You can mention that, and very rare countries in the world has like a closed economy, something like that. ठीक हो गया. So ये हमारे पास एक question है. If you have any question on this, do ask. All right, let me see what other questions इसके ऊपर आ चुके हैं circular flow पे. I think 2024 का तो we have already discussed. एक 2023 का I wanted to take a look at because इसके अंदर भी they have asked for a diagram, right? So let's see what we can do in this one. So this is a question, June 23, variant 23. So this was one of the first question that came when this topic was included. And I think the question was pretty heavy in my opinion. But I like this question. It's a very nice and thorough question in terms of what it entails collectively. So it says, with the help of a circular flow of income diagram, explain how equilibrium is determined in an open economy. Okay, and consider whether a budget deficit or a trade deficit is more likely to cause lasting disequilibrium. Okay, a few key things. When they ask for a diagram, there is a mark for it. And the mark can honestly range from one mark to an entire three mark. ठीक है? Uh, that is something that we cannot guess, honestly. ठीक है? Um, there are certain terminologies which are really important in this one, like equilibrium, like open economy, and then they are also talking about some very interesting concepts over here. Okay, so how should we go about this question? सबसे पहले तो एक हम diagram बनाएंगे. My personal opinion is do that whole diagram that we did abhi in the previous question को solve करने से पहले. I think every single question and the diagram, whatever your study resource would be, we know one thing is for sure that whatever is flowing, it is happening between the firms and the households. How the goods and services are moving this way, how expenditure is moving in this way, and factors of production are moving in this way, and the incomes are moving in this direction. ठीक है. अ, उसके बाद जब ये लोग कहते हैं explain how equilibrium is determined, that would be the writing वाला part, but I would mention savings, taxes, and imports. Okay. These are our withdrawal. And in terms of injections, we have investment, government spending, and exports. These are our injections. Please don't do abbreviations. These are widely used letters for those terms, but obviously, first time you have to do the whole thing, and you can show those arrows with it. Okay. उसके अलावा, now that we have the diagram, I think we should explain what is happening. So, it briefly, I think it's a smart idea that we should mention in the whole thing that how goods and services are moving from firms to households and how expenditure is moving from households to the firms and how incomes for the factors of production is moving from firms to the household. Uske baad, we should definitely mention what withdrawals are with their examples of savings, taxes, and imports, and injections you must mention. So pretty much all of the things that we were doing. So we want to make sure that are we really answering the question or not? So how equilibrium is determined in an open economy? Okay. So in order to answer this part, we say an equilibrium occurs when the withdrawals are equals to injections. Okay. In an open economy, the withdrawals are savings and taxes and imports, while the injections are investments and government spending and exports. So an equilibrium will occur when the amount of money going out of the system, I think withdrawals के लिए we do explain that how they are the outflows, and injections के लिए we do mention that they are the inflows. So it's a must thing, I think, कि आपको ये पूरी चीज explain करनी है, the terms and all, but we have to make sure that we are really answering this part. फिर उसके बाद, now that we've explained equilibrium के अंदर money going out is equals to money coming in, there is another diagram, by the way, जो Bamford में बना हुआ है, and I know a lot of teachers teach that. I also teach it. But उसका जो main extensive information थी वो काफी complicated थी. So after this question, I'll go into that and talk about those diagrams also. So I think it's not a bad idea to know those. But I think so far in the last three questions which have come, and every time they've said make a circular flow of income, we're making this one, firms, households, and that one. ठीक है? And we're not making the other one that I'm talking about, and I'll show you that in just a bit. तो confusion अभी भी है कि वो वाला कब बनेगा. Okay. So now that the question was talking about consider whether a budget deficit or a trade deficit is more likely to cause lasting disequilibrium. Okay. So सबसे पहली बात, I feel what we need to talk about is when we have a budget deficit, what does that really mean? तो हम कहते हैं budget deficit includes two things. One is government spending, and the other is the taxation that the government takes, right? Government spending and taxation. अब budget deficit के अंदर, actually budget has government spending and taxes. Budget deficit तो बड़ा simple है. Budget deficit says that the spending is more than the taxation, which means that the inflow is greater than the outflow, which meant that the money coming into the system is more than the money going out of the system. And what this does is that it increases the national income because there's more money coming in and less money going out. So will it do a disequilibrium? Of course, when they're not equal, क्योंकि ऊपर हम mention कर चुके हैं that equalization happens when the money going out is equals to money coming in. So if this is the scenario, then yes, we do have a disequilibrium where national income is going to rise. Okay, that's the first part. I hope I'm making sense. Second, they're saying if you have a trade deficit. Now, what is a trade deficit? Trade deficit is when your exports are less and your imports are more. Exports brings the money into the system, which is lesser than that, which means that the injections are less and withdrawals are more. So clearly, the national income is going to fall as a result, and you do have a disequilibrium. Okay. Once we have explained, uh, honestly, if I had not known the marking scheme, I would have had trouble in the idea कि ये explanation जो है ये analysis में जाएगी कि evaluation में जाएंगी. Let me take you back to the question for a second. With the help of a circular flow of income diagram, explain how equilibrium is determined in an open economy. So therefore, everything that I was explaining up until this moment, equilibrium tak, I felt was the knowledge and understanding 3 marks. I did my definitions and finally equilibrium, right? But then consider whether a budget deficit or a trade deficit is more likely to cause a lasting disequilibrium, which means that I need to sort of like explain how budget deficit and trade deficit is going to have an impact on the equilibrium, should have been my analysis. So that's what I'm doing. But then in the end, I would make a discussion on the idea of this word that said cause lasting disequilibrium. Lasting disequilibrium means that it the disequilibrium will stay for a long time, right? So that would be my evaluative discussion if that would be the case. So clearly we know that if an economy, this is what I'll say in my evaluation, that if it's like a persistent deficits, and please evaluation may you have to talk about both the things, persistent budget deficit and persistent trade deficit. So if you have persistent uh, deficits in budget and trade, then disequilibrium is likely to last because the withdrawals and injections are not equal. Okay. You can even talk about the size of these uh, deficits. If these deficits are really large in size, they will create a consistent deficit. Okay. How about, how about, like we saw, किस तरह से budget deficit के अंदर there was more money coming in than money going out. एंड बजट डेफिसिट के अंदर द मनी कमिंग इन, अगर ये दोनों इक्वलाइज हो जाए, one is causing the economy to rise, one is causing the economy to fall. If these deficits are equal, then economy might actually have an equilibrium, right? So that's also one of the things in terms of circular flow. We can say कि अगर आपका trade deficit is matched by the budget deficit, then it's quite possible that equilibrium might stay. Okay. But mostly our discussion is about if it's like a persistent deficit or if it's the size of the deficit is too large, then, you know, disequilibrium is likely to remain in the economy for the longer duration. तो इसकी जब हम मार्किंग स्कीम देखते हैं, तो this is how the examiner has graded this particular question, where they're saying understanding of circular flow of income shown through an accurate diagram showing income flows from between firms and households. I think we've done that. Correct inclusion of exports and imports. I don't know what that means, but I guess just the money coming in and money going out of the system. And correct inclusion of government spending and taxation. Now, I have a question on this कि ये correct inclusion से क्या मतलब है इनका? Are they thinking about the whole thing जो अभी हमने पिछला जो बैम्फर्ड का डायग्राम देखा था, उस डायग्राम के अंदर जो इंक्लूजन हुई थी, that was not as simple के firms के पास पैसे आ रहे हैं and taxes किस तरीके से withdraw हो रहे हैं. It was a much more complicated diagram. So let me just take that view कि वो correct inclusion से what did they really mean. तो यहाँ पर अगर आप देखें ओपन और क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी के अंदर, एक ओपन इकोनॉमी के अंदर द इंक्लूजन वाइज दैट हाउ एक्सपोर्ट्स, इन्होंने ऐसे नहीं शो किया जैसे यहाँ हो रहा है. इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, कंज्यूमर स्पेंडिंग ऑन गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज के अंदर इन्होंने ऐड किया है, और यहाँ पे एक्सपोर्ट्स और गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग को फैक्टर पेमेंट के अंदर इंक्लूड किया है. वेयर एज सेविंग और डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस इन्होंने यहां से लिए हैं, और इंपोर्ट्स और इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस जो है वो यहां से ले रहे हैं. I can see the sense in it, why they're doing something like this. Uh, Slight confusion only about these two. वैसे तो ये स्पेंडिंग के अंदर आनी चाहिए थी. But if you look at even Bamford's explanation, Bamford is really not talking a lot about it. मेरे ख्याल के अंदर as far as this question goes, जब एग्जामिनर असिस्टेंट एग्जामिनर्स को जब वो बता रहा होगा कि इसको किस तरीके से मार्किंग करनी है, I'm sure what they must have suggested to the examiner is that as long as the student is explaining that uh, injections के अंदर government spending और investments और uh, uh, exports the kid is writing, and exports और imports को imports savings और taxes को आप withdrawal में ले रहे हो, as long as they're mentioning all of this, I think that would be perfect. Your mark will be there for it. ठीक है. uh, उसके अलावा एनालिसिस के अंदर दे टॉकिंग अबाउट हाउ क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट और गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग होती है. नो, दिस इज 2025. एक सेकंड, सॉरी, 2023 के अंदर भी वी टॉकिंग ना. सो लेट मी गो बैक टू दैट क्वेश्चन. ये तो हमारा एक लास्ट बिट वाज दैट. ओके, या. तो अब इन्होंने इन द डायग्राम, correct inclusion of exports and imports, correct inclusion of government spending and taxation, inclusion in the sense of कि वो आपकी withdrawals और injections में कैसे आ रहे हैं. उसके बाद analysis के अंदर explanation of injection into the circular flow of income, explanation of leakages, यानी what are injections, what are withdrawals, and determination of equilibrium that IGX is equals to STM. I did that considering कि वो knowledge and understanding का हिस्सा होना चाहिए था. For them, I think these were easy marks to pick. Evaluation के अंदर they're saying कि अगर budget deficit होता है और trade deficit होता है तो उससे किस तरह से disequilibrium आ रहा है. We did the whole explanation of that and consider which is likely to cause lasting. Oh, 1 second. And consider whether a trade deficit or a trade budget deficit is more likely to cause lasting disequilibrium. Which of the two? तो आई थिंक उसके अंदर हमने वही बात की थी, persistent अगर डेफिसिट हो रहा होगा और वो लार्जर होगा. आई थिंक द डिस्कशन शुड हैव बीन इन इवैल्यूएशन इफ द बजट डेफिसिट इज लार्जर देन ट्रेड डेफिसिट. इसको किस तरह से मैं आर्ग्यू कर सकता हूँ लाइक दिस. आई थिंक द इवैल्यूएशन जो मैंने यहाँ सजेस्ट की है, दैट्स इनकरेक्ट एक्चुअली. This is what I should have done now that I've understood the question even better. They're asking कि ये बताओ कि बजट डेफिसिट ज्यादा बड़ा डिसइक्विलिब्रियम क्रिएट करेगा कि ट्रेड डेफिसिट. तो in that case, I think the discussion goes back to the openness of economy and government's involvement, the extent of government involvement. If in this economy the government is a major player, you know how हम जो वो पढ़ते हैं कमांड इकोनॉमी और मिक्स्ड इकोनॉमी, मिक्स्ड के अंदर कितना आप फ्री मार्केट को अलाउ कर रहे हो और कितना गवर्नमेंट इंटरवेंशन है. अगर एक इकोनॉमी के अंदर गवर्नमेंट इंटरवेंशन इज मोर देन द ओपननेस, so then budget deficit is definitely going to create a much larger impact on the disequilibrium as compared to the trade deficit. Whereas, अगर आपकी इकोनॉमी हाईली डिपेंडेंट है on the openness जैसे मालदीव्स की आप इकोनॉमी, मॉरिशस की इकोनॉमी की आप बात कर सकते हो, जो टूरिज्म पे ज्यादा रिलायंट है और गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग पे कम रिलेटिवली। तो ऐसी इकोनॉमी के अंदर यू कैन हैव अ लास्टिंग डिसइक्विलिब्रियम बिकॉज ऑफ दैट, राइट। नॉर्मली दुनिया भर में कंट्रीज के अंदर जब हम बात करते हैं ना, CIG X-M, जी का कंपोनेंट इज बिगर देन X-M, राइट, फॉर मेजॉरिटी कंट्रीज अक्रॉस बॉर्डर। ठीक है। तो इसकी वजह से वी कैन डेफिनेटली से कि ये एक साइडेड ज्यादा है इंफॉर्मेशन। ओके, सो इफ एनी क्वेश्चन टू सजेस्ट, एक वो जो मैं डायग्राम की बार बार बात कर रहा था, लेट मी go back for a second and bring that up for a minute. Bamford, what he's done is he is talking about equilibrium and disequilibrium in terms of this diagram. ये diagram है क्या? Uh, when I teach this particular diagram, I go into the detail of how this diagram actually came about. ठीक है? And there's a much larger explanation for it. The explanation sort of goes in this way. And they've just taken just one element of the whole thing. This is how this model is created. We take a look at various national income levels of the economy, suggesting that if your national economy is worth 0 versus 500 if it earns 1,000, इसको ऐसे सोच लो on a very micro level that an individual has 0 income, has 500 key income, has 1,000 key income, 1,500 and so on. That's from an individual's point of view. Otherwise, ये पूरी एक national economy के numbers हैं. Okay. Now, what we want to compare is in a simple two-sector economy, whenever you earn $1, what you do with that is you consume some part of it and you save some part of that. Okay. So if you're earning 0 income, if an individual is earning 0 income, will their consumption be 0 also? So we say that that's not possible. People have to consume. Okay, even if our economy shuts down and we're not producing any goods, there has to be some sort of consumption that needs to happen. So this number tells us that even if your income is 0 in a society, hypothetically, there will be a consumption of 500. And where is this consumption coming from? Well, clearly, it is coming from your savings, your previous savings. We can call this saving. All right. ये जो expenditure mentioned हुआ है, that even at 0 income, you do have to consume something. This is called autonomous consumption. Autonomous. Autonomous means that irrespective of income, you have to spend, right? It has nothing to do with your incomes. It has nothing to do with national income. In order to survive, you need to spend 500. Okay. Uske baad, this model goes on and suggests that if income rises, you would notice that consumption doesn't stay at 500, but it actually goes up also. Not too much, but marginally. So now you're spending your entire $500 and you have actually increased a little bit of your spending also because you're earning more. And now your savings is this saving is not as much as it was before, but it is still there. So when you start making incomes, you feel that there are certain expenditures I have to also do. So let's do that and let's eat away a little bit from our savings. This is called induced expenditure. Induced expenditure क्या होता है? Which basically shows that when your income rises, your spending also rises as a result of that. And as your income continues to grow, your consumption also grows. And eventually, you don't have to eat anything from your savings. And then when you earn 1500, you spend about 1250, and now you started making some savings. And if you apply this knowledge to the country, it's pretty almost legit. All right. That as your income starts to go up, your consumption also rises and your savings also rises, right? Because consumption के साथ चक्कर क्या है that every time you earn extra income, you're not going to end up spending all of it, right? First, you will focus on your basics and then your luxuries. And then a point will come that even after those luxuries, you feel that, I'm making more money. Let's put that in the savings. So this is how a nation works. Now, when I draw these diagrams, this is how they look. Okay. Bella diagram. Let me make this one consumption key line. So this is how it sort of looks like. The two diagrams. This is the derivation of the diagrams that Bamford has made. Income goes on the y-axis, aggregate expenditure goes on the x-axis. Okay. So if I draw this line, zero income पे 500 का consumption. So that could be a mark over here. Here, let's say when income rises, consumption also rises, right? 750, 1000, and so on and so forth. Balki usse pehle, let me do one thing. We make a 45-degree line. It's a comparison line. It's an important line. You know why? Because what this line tells us is 500 ki consumption, 500 ki income if you earn, 500 you consume. 1000 you earn, 1000 you consume. It's sort of like a line with which we are going to compare the actual numbers. But हमने क्या देखा? That at zero income, we're spending 500, 750, 1000, 1250, and so on and so forth. और उसकी basis पे, this is how our consumption line sort of looks like. Okay? As far as savings की line goes, we can see zero income के ऊपर consumption is 500, zero income पे savings is negative 500. So it starts off from the negative side, right? Something like this. And then it goes up, savings get zero, then savings increases, right? तो इस तरीके से हमारी एक savings की line आ रही है based on, this is completely based on the numbers that we have. As income goes up, वही 1000 के ऊपर income was equals to consumption, so your savings was zero at 1000, and then as your income goes up, your savings goes into positive. तो ये हमारा एक तरीके का representation है. Which, so now at least we have the first part of what Bamford was trying to explain here, कि सेविंग्स की लाइन जो आती है, दिस इज हाउ द सेविंग्स लाइन कम. और इक्विलिब्रियम और डिसइक्विलिब्रियम के अंदर अभी हमने एक क्वेश्चन किया जिसमें वी स्पोक अबाउट हाउ द विड्रॉल्स आर इक्वल्स टू इंजेक्शंस, एंड डिसइक्विलिब्रियम्स के अंदर हाउ विड्रॉल्स कैन बी ग्रेटर और विड्रॉल्स कैन बी लेस देन इंजेक्शन. तो बेसिकली दैट इज वेयर वी आर गोइंग. Up, they're saying, okay, savings in a two-sector economy, when you save money, what do you do with that saved money? Obviously, you invest. Okay. So what Bamford is suggesting is in this model of yours, sorry, in this model of ours, जिसके अंदर हमने savings की बात की है, that how when income increases, Our saving starts from negative, goes to zero, and then goes into positive. When the firms investment line sort of looks like this. Now, what is this line actually showing us about investments? Well, we're talking about business investments. A certain level of business investments hai. Even if income is zero, we are investing a certain amount. And even if the income is rising, our investment is of the same level. Income के साथ investment is not rising. Income के साथ independently investment is at a particular level. That means investment को इन्होंने at least इस मॉडल में investment को autonomous लिया हुआ है. You remember autonomous? That even if income increases or decreases does not matter. एक कितनी investment आ रही है that is mentioned. So what we observe is at this point right here, the withdrawal is equals to the injection and we have our equilibrium. That's where Bamford is coming from. ठीक हो गया? That's where this whole explanation is coming from कि आपका income के साथ आपकी savings gets affected but not the investment. And हमारे इस मॉडल में withdrawal or injection intersects right over here. The money people are saving is equals to the money invested in the economy. On the right of this diagram and on the left of this diagram, you have disequilibriums. For example, at Y1, savings are more money is going out of the system than coming in. So the withdrawals is greater than injections. So your economy starts to shrink and national income reduces. On the other hand, when you are at Y2, the injections are greater than withdrawal, so the economy starts to expand until we reach the equilibrium level. So this is how the economy maneuvers around and takes you to the equilibrium, and that's what the disequilibrium is. This is what Bamford is basically referring to. ये obviously two sector का है. That's why I am only writing savings and investment. अगर ये three sector होती, closed होती, तो फिर हम क्या करते? सेविंग्स के साथ हम इंट्रोड्यूस कर देते टैक्सेस को बिकॉज टैक्सेस आर आल्सो विड्रॉल्स हायर द इनकम ग्रेटर द टैक्सेस एंड इंजेक्शंस में हम गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग को इंट्रोड्यूस कर देते. ये हो गया क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी लाइक वी वर राइटिंग इन आवर एसेज. ओके, फिर उसके बाद जब हम गवर्नमेंट को ओपन कर देते हैं इस इकोनॉमी को, तो इंपोर्ट इज अ विड्रॉल and export is an injection. So इस तरीके से STM और IGX जहां intersect करते हैं, this becomes a four sector open economy. And you know, अब यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ जरूर है that equilibrium income in a two sector economy. Explanation के अंदर they're not mentioning, they have mentioned कि देखो circular flow of income में जो है injections और withdrawals होते हैं. If the injections are greater than withdrawals, तो फिर क्या होता है? Income rises. If withdrawals is greater than injections, then economy slows down in the circular flow. Figure 16.5 shows equilibrium income in a closed economy, but it's not mentioning कि ये circular flow of income का diagram है. In the next one, what are they showing? Economy is at equilibrium, savings or investments, two sector hai. If investment increases, what happens? Your new equilibrium, because there's more injection coming in than withdrawal, your economy reaches a high level of potential. फिर they're also showing how जो अभी हमने किया four sector में किस तरह से होता है. Nowhere they're mentioning that this is a circular flow of income का diagram. So therefore, circular flow of income के लिए you should be making the one that we did before. Okay, the one with the arrows and all. we should not be making this one. Kids have done this. Teachers I know have suggested you can make this one, but this is not a circular flow of income. ठीक हो गया? Uh, so yeah. तो ये Bamford के point of view से this is how these two diagrams were dealt with. All right. Any questions on this?